It's episode 110 of the Improv London podcast. I'm your host, Stuart Moses, and this week's guest is Dave Robertson.
Stuart, thank you so much indeed. That 110, that's 6 in binary, so that could be quite an interesting magic number. I don't know. Just thought about that one as you were saying it.
Well, let's hope it is very much a magical number. Thank you for coming around to my house.
It's a pleasure to be here in Mansion Moses. It's very beautiful. Love the fountain and the topiary.
Yes, Improv London Towers, as I like to call it. Very much not in London, but never mind. Yes, well, we can go frolic in the fountain afterwards if you like. It's not an invitation I give to everyone that comes on the podcast. So tell me about the Free Radicals. What's that? Who are they?
Okay, so the Free Radicals are a improv troupe based in Reading. So we came into being in March of last year, well, technically a little earlier, but we've been sharing digs with the British Science Association's Reading branch, a restaurant in town called Smoking Billy's, and the proprietor Bill Dunn is a huge supporter of these kinds of events, community events, and he introduced me to the local team of the BSA, and they were looking for some ideas for the annual British Science Week, which takes place in March every year. And as a technical person myself, I have a background in software development, and having done improv in the States, surrounded by technical people, I thought, well, wouldn't it be great to introduce a bit of comedy into science? And hadn't really got anything in mind, but we kicked a few ideas around the guys who were also doing improv with me at Seamus Allen's What's the Game classes, and we devised a format, part short form, part long form, where we'd start with a bit of short form and then invite a science communicator to get up and talk about their subject for 15 minutes, and we would then use that as the seed for a long form second half. So we thought about doing it as a one-off. It went down incredibly well with our first speaker, Dr. Tom Sizemore from Reading, who's a soil scientist.
Wow! And
we just had a great time, and the BSA loved it, the audience loved it, and Bill said, "Why don't you guys think about doing this on a regular basis?" So we're now over 18 months into doing it, and we're now, apart from August and December, we're now planning to do one a month in Reading, and we have guest speakers coming along every month. We've had neuroscientists. We had a telecoms expert doing SMS. We had a quantum gravity expert.
Wow.
You name the subject, provided we can get our hooks into it in some way, we can make a show out of it. And we have been having a blast doing it. So that's it. So we're kind of we could do this with any expert, but we've kind of honed in on the STEM subjects because Reading is a pretty strong hub for STEM, science, technology, engineering, maths experts, being the home to so many startup companies, big subsidiaries, and also the university here. It's been a rich seam for us to mine. It's been a lot of fun.
Cool. So the British Science Association, what do they do? How did you get involved with them?
Well, so they, as I said, they used the Smoking Billy's restaurant for a monthly event called Café Scientifique, and it's a 15 to 30 minute presentation by an expert, and then they invite members of the audience along to listen to the subject. And the BSA, their whole job, their whole raison d'etre is to promote the public understanding of science, and the way that they do that is through coaching and helping scientists to get their message across, and there's a few sort of spin-out organisations, or maybe not spin-out, but sort of related organisations. So there's quite a scene in the science communication world, and if you look for SciComm, hashtag SCICOMM on Twitter, for example, you'll find thousands and thousands of science communicators all linking together, and they'll do it through these sort of pop-up presentations. They do stand-up comedy science. There's even a challenge that takes place somewhere in the UK every year where they have a stand-up comedy science program. They do a pint of science, which is basically they'll take a science communicator to a pub and do a talk about bees or hydroelectricity, whatever it might be. And so they're generally pretty game, provided we don't mangle the science and we make that incredibly clear. That part is the real stuff. This is completely made up, or is it? We will then have fun with it, and they're very much supportive of that. And in part because a lot of the scientists that we talk to, if they're academics, they're looking for evidence that they are reaching out to the public, and that helps with grant applications, for example. And we will often we make it a rule that we'll record every show, video it, and we post the shows up on our website, and people can then look at those, share those, and at least it's evidence that the talk took place and that there was engagement, because that helps them, that helps their resumes and their conversations. And sometimes we're dealing with scientists who are actually working in industry. Sometimes it's very early stage. They can't talk too much about the research they're doing, but it's almost like a show reel for the technology that they're working on, and they can then use that and show that they've got a message going on out there. So it's a fun little device, bringing improv to this subject matter. And we'd love to do more of it. At the moment, we're just in Reading, but we're very keen to try and take this elsewhere. That's obviously the long form part, and we have a few games that we've developed. They are sort of like games you may have seen in other short form contexts, but we either give them a name that's sort of linked into the science side of things, or we've actually invented a couple that are very science oriented. So you may be familiar with the alphabet game. So you speak alternate lines starting with the next letter of the alphabet. We have one which we call periodic table. So we've got a periodic table in a ring binder, and we ask for a number between 1 and 118, and that's where we start. So if you're starting with oxygen, the first word of the line begins with O, and then the next element. This is where I show my ignorance. I have no idea what the next element is, but if it's lead, it's PB. So your first two words must begin with PB, and we have a lot of fun with that. And another game that we really enjoy. It's actually a relatively new one for us, but it's an absolute favourite already. It's based on the game, a game called Telephone, where effectively you have we call it peer review, and we ask for a famous or iconic scene from science. We had one suggestion, which was the Wright brothers' first powered flight, and the crew line up against the front wall, facing the wall, so they can't see what's happening behind them. The first player is tapped out and is, we whisper into their ear what they have to then communicate, and through the benefit of mime and an appropriate soundtrack that our amazing tech guy John is working out. We get the first guy to mime for the second, and the second then mimes for the third, and by the end of it we usually have some kind of bizarre interpretive dance that degenerates into complete farce, and then we ask in reverse order the guys to try and work out what it was they were being told. It's just a lot of fun. The audience love it. I mean, the audience is an interesting mix, because Reading is it's not definitely hasn't got the kind of cultural footprint that London has. It has a very healthy comedy scene, but Improv is very small. It really did begin with Seamus Allen sort of setting up the local scene at Billy's, and it's kind of grown to a core of about 30 people, and from that 30 we've got 4 very good troupes, all with their own separate brand and separate identity. So pulling in an audience, having this, the STEM audience in Reading as having something that appeals to them has been really a real benefit, because we're now getting folks in to sort of see us make fun of STEM, and then people who want to hear about and learn about improv. And all of our shows are promotions for the public understanding of science, but also to really get people interested in improv, because my background is I'm not an actor. I've had a career in the IT industry, and I've only been in improv for just under 5 years. So I had a career developing software. I was a pre-sales guy for a software company, and latterly I ran international operations for a software development tools company. So I dropped into improv completely at the end of this career, and have learned how valuable it is for STEM types to help lose that fear of getting up and talking, and consequently helping them to be more effective at getting their message across, not just the science or the tech that they're trying to communicate, but often their own needs, and helping them become more confident in the workplace and out there in their lives, which it's been great to see. And I had a chat with somebody that so a bit more background is as part of my career I had 2 stints of 3 years living in California. The first time I was out in Menlo Park and Palo Alto, and the second time I was out in Oakland, and it was the second phase where, after a particularly embarrassing technical hitch in front of the whole company, I mumbled my way through a very important presentation and thought I need to be able to be a bit more adaptable in front of my audiences. And also I felt I was a little wooden in front of an audience. I didn't really excite an audience. I knew what I had to say, but it wasn't very exciting. So my colleague Ed, who is an absolute, he hoovers up comedy clubs and improv clubs in LA and San Francisco all the time. He told me about this show that was being run in San Francisco as part of Sketchfest called Prompter. I didn't go to the show, but the idea of it was enough to get me looking at improv. And this show was essentially a TED talk where you were given a subject you'd never heard of before out of a hat, and you were given the first line of your talk, and then you had to carry on for as long as possible before being booed off the stage. And I thought, that's very much like just a minute.
Yeah.
What an amazing set of skills that would be to have. So I went looking for an improv theatre, and there was one on my doorstep in downtown Oakland called Pan Theatre, and I joined them. And I went along, very importantly, with the commitment that I would do whatever was asked of me.
Yeah.
That was very important, because I think if I'd gone with a sort of prove to me that you're going to be useful, it might not have worked. And we did these silly games, and I had an absolute blast and just carried on. And through a number of exercises, I was going there 3 times a week for practice, and I was in shows, and I couldn't believe what was happening to me. It was quite amazing. And about a year or so after, a new person joined. What they had this sort of level 1 dojo. It was like an introduction to improv, and there was a guy there who was a server developer for the Oracle database. Real deep technical guy, a guy called Krishna. A lot of fun, but hadn't been used to communicating. And he went along. I didn't realise this until many months later. He said that what I told him made such an impact that it made him come back for more. And I said to him, everyone talks about improv being, yes and yes and yes and if you've ever seen that film, The Yes Man, with Jim Carrey, some people think that's what improv is right. You just say yes to everything.
Yeah.
I said, it wasn't that for me. What it was is it made it less likely that I would say no. So it reduced I would put the defensive no up all the time whenever I was asked for things. And I realised after a while that no wasn't a comfortable thing for me as my first response. and I realised my brain's being rewired. I'm becoming a different person here. And I just told him this story, and after his first session, anyway, he kept coming back. And months later, he said, "If you hadn't said that to me, I probably wouldn't have come back. But I stuck at it, and it's really made a big difference." And that little interaction with Krishna is kind of behind my sort of love of improv, and I sort of a bit of an evangelist for using it to help people, just kind of rewire themselves and help them become, get out of their own way, I think. And I wrote down a note before I came here, because one of the questions I was thinking that you might ask is what is it about improv? And for me, it's I'd like to call it fearlessness for geeks. Really, I think that's how I would that's what I would describe as improv as. So anyway, so that's kind of how I got into it.
That's brilliant. So what sort of things were you doing at the Pan Theatre?
Well, we began with, so they used to do this Monday night, they called the Dojo, and it was essentially a taster for anyone to go along. But one thing I didn't realise at the time, but some of the most experienced improvisers in their community were there as well. And it's essentially modelled on the classic martial arts dojos, where you've got the novices there at the same time as the black belts. They're all going through their set pieces, their routines, and it's also a way, I think, of giving back as an experienced person.
Yeah,
is giving back to the new people, and maybe just keeping them on the right track. Because I think back to some of my early performances. And I remember one scene, I was a bit starstruck because a couple of the top performers were I was playing with for the first time in this show, and we were doing a show based on the road trip format.
Right.
And
what's
so road trip is where you have usually one or two protagonists and a suggestion from the audience about where they start, where they're going, and what their the mission is.
Right.
And the protagonists move through the scenes, and all the other players play supporting parts. Yeah. And in this particular scene, they were in Vegas at an S&M buffet. Yeah. And I, as an inexperienced and slightly nervous improviser, went straight for the lowest common denominator, and was deftly cut. The edit then happened by one of the most experienced. It left the audience laughing because they could imagine where this was going, but it stopped it from degenerating into something that was fundamentally me being nervous and trying to get a cheap laugh.
Right.
And that's something which only as time has gone on have I seen that is nerves really make you go to the sex jokes, the scatological or religion or whatever it might be, and it takes a certain degree of skill and mindfulness to kind of help steer them around. So the dojo is a fantastic way of getting people to coach the new people, but also to encourage them to come back. That was the important part, because they wanted more people taking their classes, and we did essentially an 8-week 101, and culminating in a short form show at the end of the season. That was my first ever comedy performance, and it's, even though I was one of 12, I thought everyone was there to see me. But that was a great experience. And then after that, I signed up for the long form, and that was things got really interesting there, because I started to get real understanding of the importance of character. Almost the character becomes more important than the comedy, and in fact, the comedy gets better because the characters are more believable and more invested. And we were doing a bit of Meisner. We were doing some, I think, elements of really what all of the improv teachers had learned from different places. So we had a lot of Chicago trained and LA trained improvisers there. And since I've been back in the UK, so I moved back in 2015. I've been really dealing with a slightly different, probably more of the Keith Johnston style, where it's a bit more, I suppose, around the sort of theatre style improv rather than the, I guess, what would you call Chicago improv? More, I'm not sure how I distinguish between the two, really.
So I always think of Keith Johnston as being more theatrical storytelling and, UCB, those sort of things as more sketch. So they're improvising, but they're improvising comedy sketches as opposed to Keith Johnston, where we're improvising, but we're improvising theatre or stories. That's the way on which I...
Yeah, so it's sketches, so it's scenarios versus characters, I suppose, to an extent. I guess. It's hard to say.
It's all the same thing, really, but yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I like to listen to your podcast, because you get so many different perspectives. The 110 interviews you've done, maybe more actually, but the different perspectives are also different. And I said to you beforehand about I had a takeaway from one of your podcasts. You couldn't even remember it had actually been said, but I think that's the value, is that you're hearing other people's approaches, and there'll be one or two things they say that you can just hold and keep with you. And I find that I play piano, I get piano lessons, and I also play golf and get golf lessons, and so out of the thousands of words that come my way, there might only be a dozen every time that I'll grab and think that is what I needed. So I think that's really important. And it's the same with the improv. I love to perform because there's, at any given time, there's a learning opportunity might come, and you can just take it and use it again, or you want to emulate something that somebody else did that you really admired.
Yes,
which I love about this whole scene. It's there's some such originality out there.
Yes, and there's always things to learn, and sometimes, you learn different things at different times. And if you're reading an improv book, and you're not the same person each time you read it, and you might take different lessons from it and things like that. So, anyway, but thank you for listening.
Not at all. No, it's because I do find it's a great way of finding out what's on as well in the scene. Because it's you're branching out obviously from London a bit now, and there's to learn what's happening and who's doing what where is a really good way of finding things out.
Yeah, I really wanted that to be something. Also, because I enjoy finding out myself. But the more we can connect people and people can find out what other people are doing, it's only going to make things stronger and make the scene wherever we are better. So
indeed. So as I've said, the kind of my evangelical nature about getting the word out. I'm not just a technical person. I was a manager as well. I managed distributed teams, and as I look back, using improv in a work context, I think, would be a really good way of getting people more engaged. I've heard apocryphally of some really fun improv exercises to do, like the slideshow, that you don't know what the slide's going to be, you don't know what the topic's going to be, and you get the executive team to do it in front of the company, that kind of thing. And one of our crew, the Free Radicals crew, Alex McWilliam, he actually has a improv for business company he's set up to do just that. He's been doing it with a few companies now. I'd love to see more companies do it with their technical crews. Not just because it's one of the things that having managed developers before, developers are artists. They're not these people you keep in a room, give them specs to develop to. They have ideas, they want to be heard, and I think there's a lot to be done with that community, of showing them, developers, how to be more expressive and more confident. So I'd love to see more of that happening in the workplace as well.
I found that improv has helped me just be more open to ideas, and someone suggests something and I'm like, well, yes, let's try it. A powerful thing says, let's trial it. People are happy to trial things. They're not happy to commit to doing something forever, but if you say, well, let's trial it, then they're happy to do that. And that's one way of saying yes that I found particularly helpful at work.
Yeah. There's I don't know if you've seen on Facebook, there's the Applied Improvisation Network.
Yes.
And there's some great uses of improv out there. And I'm fascinated by, I'm not necessarily looking to have any kind of, professional career on the stage, but I would really enjoy the opportunity to take improv into an environment for serious use. And one, I read an article a couple of months ago, actually, you may have seen it, from New York Magazine, where they're talking about Tim Robbins' Actors Gang, which is a Hollywood sort of elite, invitation-only theatre school. One of the members took improv into high security prisons in California, and I've got a link I can give you if you wanted to post with this. But the recidivism rate for the inmates is 50% typically. Those that went on this improv class, it went down to 10%.
Wow! Because
they were just learning to. These skills that we talked about earlier, they're using it to kind of shift their perspective and also become a bit more, I suppose, put themselves in the position of the people that they have been typically against. Be they the man or the system or the gangs that they're. And the building of empathy and just listening skills has been incredibly powerful. It's shifted them out of that rut they were in. Some really good stories, and another good friend of mine who's performed with the Radicals, Sonia Bishop. She splits her time between Pan Theatre in Berkeley and Oakland, and the UK, where she's an associate professor of psychology at Berkeley, and she's a fellow of St John's College, Oxford.
Wow.
And she co-developed a taster module with Adrian Vasquez, who is one of our improv teachers at Pan, on the psychology of improv. Actually, because there are clear, measurable benefits on the brain of doing improv skills, and she's got to develop that and teach that in front of students. And
brilliant!
I'd love to be on that course.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah,
cool. So, talking about science, you mentioned not mangling the science. So I'm thinking about we're at a Free Radicals show. You've had somebody. They talk about their subject, for 10, 15 minutes? Or 10, 15
longer if the audience is engaged, we'll let them run with it.
Right.
And that has happened a few times.
All right, cool. So how do you pull from what they've said, mindful of the fact that they're going to be talking about science, you need to get the science right?
Yeah.
What's your kind of process there?
I think we do... So we call our shows Schrodinger's hat. And the reason being is that we
love a pun.
There's a pun coming here. Is that Schrodinger would sometimes communicate through his hat. So sometimes you didn't know whether it was truth or fiction in the same way as his cat being alive or dead. So we kind of have a bit of an artistic license that okay, you've heard the real sciencey stuff. We're going to have some fun with it. And on any given show night, half the troupe aren't scientists.
Right.
The other half might know enough from watching science fiction to be dangerous. And it's rare that any of us are subject matter experts on what we've just heard.
Yeah.
What we try and do is, we always ask the speaker to give some kind of practical application or impact in the real world of their subject. So when we had the quantum gravity talk, how on earth does that relate to real life? But we got some great examples, and we used that to develop. In that case, it was a kind of a interdimensional love story, and I can't remember the exact details. And when we did we had one on Internet of Things recently. And that ended up, the story revolved around a boy that was able to communicate with internet-connected devices in the same way that C-3PO talks to R2-D2. and he was able to essentially bring all of the devices around to help improve the town, and get rid of the rat problem and the litter problem in the town. It's all this kind of stuff, and that was all based on ideas that come from the talk. So, it's important that we don't rubbish the speaker, we don't rubbish the science. We pay homage to it. We have fun with it. And occasionally they just laugh out loud. More often than not, I would hasten to add, laugh out loud. Clever how we managed to connect these dots together. You can tell we always have fun with it, and the audience, we have just despite the venue being a little uncomfortable on a hot or a cold night, we get a lot of return visitors. Yeah. Some fans come along just to see what we get up to.
And these are actual real people who are improvisers. Wow.
Absolutely, exactly. And this is the thing, because Seamus and Alex and I and John McBride, who runs Ninja Duck, which is a new spin out from the Seamus's What's the Game class. We spend a lot of time making sure that we don't cannibalise each other's audiences, because this is one of the things we had at Pan, is that often there'd be more people on stage than there were in the audience.
I've been in that situation more often than not.
Exactly. and the improvisers are often performing to other improvisers. We don't have the luxury in Reading, because I mentioned it's a fairly small scene, but there's usually hardcore of the people that come to improv are in the audience most weeks. But by ensuring that we are changing up the things that we do, we're bringing in different people, and the goal is get them coming back to our shows, but also get them going to the other shows, and the holy grail, which has happened a few times, is get some of the audiences into the classes.
Yes.
Because it's amazing to me how many people sit. I say that. Okay, having said that, I'm immediately now.
Go on, say it.
I've got to say it. So I was about to say, it's amazing to me how many people sit in a show and go, "Oh my God, I could never do that." And here's me about to just next Friday, on the 31st. There's Ninja Duck is doing a open mic stand-up show. It will be my second stand-up set. The first one I ever did was in April, because John came up to me and said, "We're doing a free open mic stand-up comedy show. You're funny. We'd like you to do a set." And because I said earlier on that my instinct to say no is no longer there, I ended up saying yes.
Excellent.
And then I actually had some ideas that I'd written down, and over the years, often come out of improv shows. I thought that would be really funny to do something with that, and I'd written them down, so I was able to get a 5-minute set out of it, and I've got another one for this Friday. But I think this is something I kid you not, Stuart. This is something being a stand-up is something I wanted to do from as early as I can remember, and it took me until I was 50 years old to do it for the first time.
Wow.
And it was only because I was asked. And it was only because I'd done improv for the previous few years. If you'd asked me any time before I'd started doing improv, I'd have said no. Yeah. And that's just as an illustration. So it's kind of nice to be able to say to people, you can do this. This is not complicated. Go back to this fearlessness for geeks again. The thing that I absolutely loved about the Pan experience was the fact that we would, every time someone messed up, we would celebrate it. You've been in those classes before where someone mangles a word or fluffs the one word at a time, and everyone goes yay, and they mix up the circle and you start again. And that teaches you that it's okay. But on top of that, it's when you're in a scene and someone mangles a name, and that becomes that person's name. Seamus often says, the person to say it defines it. And if you've just called somebody, Stewpot instead of Stuart, then that is your name for the rest of the show. And even when you can't remember the names, and someone who was previously called Bill is now called Ted, the number of times that someone go, well, actually, yes, I'm Ted on weekends, just to kind of make justify that reality. It's And those skills are so important to overcome that fear, the fear of failing, and in fact celebrating failing, because as we all know in improv, some of the funniest scenes come from those cock-ups.
Yes, exactly.
It's so much fun.
Yes, they are. Mistakes are gifts, as
Indeed,
we are often told. So when you're performing stand-up, what's your stand-up style? I know you've only done one.
I've only done one. So I like to link I like to link things together. So I had 3 different jokes effectively I wanted to tell, and I found a way to link them together. And I realised that is something that I tend to do. I've always done it. It's I'll often be told 2 bits of information, and I will find some bizarre way to shoehorn a link between them.
That's interesting.
So my subject on Friday, without giving anything away, is the importance of being clearly understood,
right.
Which happens to link 3 separate, effectively funny stories, and I've managed to find a way to do that. But it reminds me of a story. This happened to me. I was in an executive team meeting, and my CEO was talking about a recent trip he'd made to Morocco, where they were taken by some dodgy guide out into the desert, where they were shown stopped for some peddler on the street or on the dirt track, who the only things he was selling were blue jeans and paracetamol. And I just said, "Oh, they must have been tight jeans," and because that was the only connection I could make between those 2 objects. Why would someone be selling just those 2 items together? Just as by way of an example. That's kind of, and I'll often do that in scenes as well. But it's not unique to me. I see other improvisers do the same. It's a great. Those callbacks can sometimes be a lot of fun. In scenes.
Cool. Well. We'll make sure we plug Friday's show, and just going back to the Free Radicals. When you're doing the long form set, is it narrative? Is it non-narrative? Are you telling a story inspired by the talk, or are you doing scenes and then they sort of come together? Or
we've tried a couple of forms. The very first thing we did was essentially a montage, and so a montage of scenes. But for me, as effectively the director, I didn't feel very satisfied with that. I wanted a narrative, and that for me was one of the most powerful parts of the forms we used to do at Pan, which were often based around Harold's or the French Braid or Village. Those sorts of formats where you are calling back or overlaying things that happened earlier. I wanted a nice, neat ending, so we did experiment with a couple of forms, and the style does change. We do morph it from time to time. At the moment, we're doing sort of like an Armando, really, which is a bit. We use the speaker as our kind of seed, the monologist, if you like. We then do a bit of a run at the start, just to kind of throw out some ideas that we can stick with, and then we quickly try to whittle those down to 2 powerful threads, which we then try to connect at the end. That's kind of, it's a very simple form. We want to do some more experimenting. Part of the problem is we have, with the summer being here, and with, as I say, we've got these 4 different troupes now that have spun out of that original idea. We're finding it quite hard to get everyone together to practice. That's the thing we're struggling with now is quality practice time. So people still gather every Wednesday evening for Seamus's class. That's essentially the core, and trying to get people to commit to more than that one night a week is not easy. As I've heard so many of your interviewees say. But the other thing as well, we're kind of lucky because we've lost a few of our improvisers to the London scene. In fact, we've got one of our guys, Patrick, who's actually in the process of moving closer to London in order to improve his and Sam Morrish, who you may have met Sam, but she went on to do stuff at the nursery. She's just finishing the nursery original Carmen. She's in that at the Fringe. So we've lost a few of folks to London, but we are quite lucky because most of the people who are doing the improv in Reading, they're working full time, they're living full time around here. It's very hard for them to go to London on a regular basis. So we can kind of tap them on the shoulder and say, look, please come and play with us. We're always greedily watching the newbies at the classes to try to get them along to our troupe practices, and even if they don't perform with us, we want to try things out, we want to experiment, and we've lost a bit of momentum over the summer. We're hoping to get back into that again soon. But if there's any improvisers in the area listening who want to kind of come and get involved, then we'd love to have you.
Cool.
Because it's all these ideas, throwing new styles and just new capabilities. Because every improviser has a arsenal of capabilities to bring to the scenes. Would be great. And we've got one guy who's a really good guitarist, and he's great at improvising guitar, and I'll see if I can snaffle him for a show. And I mentioned my piano lessons. I'm struggling manfully to get to a point where I can risk improvising a lot, in a show, but I'm still away from that yet.
Yeah.
But we're doing what we can.
Yeah, that sounds great. It is always the struggle to get people into the rehearsal room and to commit to that. And I think getting people with the same level of commitment is actually much more important than getting the people with the same ability or something like that. It's just if everyone can commit, the same amount, then that's kind of the secret of a successful group.
Yes, absolutely. And it's there isn't. We've had a few creative differences, but I think one of the things that's been quite helpful, as having run company and running teams. There's time for consensus, and then you need to kind of get a grip. And we try to be consensus driven, but it kind of doesn't always work. Yeah. So and I'll often step back and out of the show. I'll be in the booth at the back, waving, frantically on, time and steering things and trying to be a bit more hands-on. But so that's the other thing, talking about the differences between the States and here. It may just be more about the sort of goading style, which I know that so Seamus mentioned his time with Ken Campbell, and there's a big diaspora of the people that all trained with Ken. He was much more of a goading or style, and I see that with the Keith Johnson as well. There's more, the audience goes or the other actors goad. So it's much more kind of interrupt driven than what I was doing in the States, which was much more free form. You followed a structure, and there wasn't really, once you got up there and got going, there wasn't really any interference from an outside director. There might be the odd lights down to scene and to signify an edit, but that was pretty much it. So we play around with both of those styles as we need to, and but I want my guys to be able to self-edit, to self-determine, because ultimately we all get a chance to play. We rotate MC duties.
Oh, right, yeah.
I'm the default unless someone steps up and says they'd like to do it or they've got an idea. We try to put a lesson plan into every one of our practices now. We didn't initially, and it kind of got a bit chaotic. But I try to read improv books and listen to some of the ideas that your interviewees have had, and apply those, because there's some great tips to bring in that really help focus the practice. And Caitlin, who's one of our regular players, she's from New York, New Jersey, and she's done a lot of stand-up and improv in the States, and she brings a lot of ideas as well. So it's a really good mix of perspectives that we have. And we don't, none of us, or I personally am not experienced enough to claim that I can do it all, and I really would like those guys to bring more in of these ideas, because this is a journey, it's a learning opportunity all the time.
Yeah. So you're coaching from within the group.
Yes. Yeah. We have. We've managed to build a little bit of a war chest. because we sell tickets. They're not that much, but we do enough to cover costs, because we have to rent the room for practice and run the website, and we've got a bit of a war chest. So one of the things I want to do is go head up into London a bit more. I say a bit more. I've actually, despite the fact this is an Improv London podcast, since I've been back in the UK doing improv, I actually haven't done any improv in London.
Oh, really?
It's all been done in this area through the people that are in come and go. We've had a few visits from folks in London. So last year, I think we had. I can't remember his last name, but Remy. You probably know Remy.
Oh, but Remy Bertrand.
Yeah, Remy Bertrand. He came down, and some of his guys came along as well, because I think Seamus and Remy know each other.
Right.
And so we've had a few people, sort of drop in and bring their perspectives in. But it would be good to find a couple of guest coaches to come in and go, we like what they're doing. Let's bring that in. And so I expect to be up in London soon.
Cool. I can recommend it. It's very good.
good. But yes, indeed.
So you mentioned reading books and things like that. Is there a particular favourite book, improv book, that you would recommend?
The only one there's two I've read cover to cover. Improv by Keith Johnson, but the one that's really had the biggest impact on me was the John Wright's Why Is That Funny? I don't know if you've read that.
Yes. Oh, I tell you what, I've got a bit of a story about that. So yes, I have read that, and I had a really terrible train journey that I think the first train that I was trying to get was cancelled, and I think I had an hour-long wait at the first train journey station, and I was travelling on a Sunday, and it just took a very long time. And I was reading the later chapters of Why Is That Funny, where he's talking about all the different types of clowning and all the kind of the how do I describe it? The sort of the negative feelings that a lot of these different types of clowning had, and I was like, this is not what I need right now, but I've got nothing else to entertain me. So it was a fabulous book, but it was just like, it was a bleak day, and it was bleaker subject matter than I thought it was going to be, considering the book's called Why Is That Funny?
Well, what's interesting about that is I did a couple of workshops with an improv teacher called Jimmy Carrane in the States. He does this thing called the Art of Slow Comedy, and what was really interesting about that is it was ultimately all about real believable characters, and it wasn't about the funny. And I found it was a bit kind of counterintuitive, and it was only really when I got my head round, the importance of having that believability that then made the payoff when something funny happened so much greater.
Yeah.
And so I understand, then reading John's book, especially when he's going in about the buffoon and the grotesques, that you can see, and we all see it, when someone has the meltdown in public. He talks a lot about the boss clown that is shouting and screaming at everybody, and ultimately always becomes a cropper some way. You can see why there's the seeds of comedy in there, but you've got to go through that pain in order to make the payoff much better. I'm sorry about that with your train journey.
No, I mean it was awful. It was sort of amazing, and even as I was going through it, I thought, well, this is quite an experience. When I get to speak to Dave on episode 110, I'll be able to bring this story up. So it's all paid off.
Well, exactly. Everything happens for a reason.
So if someone was to step on the stage with you, what could they do to delight you?
What could they do to delight me? Wow. So that's a really I like that question. So invariably, it's things I'm bad at myself, which is listening and not going on with their own ideas. But
really,
I tend to. I have a habit of I'll stand on the sidelines and go, oh, I know what's going to make a big difference here. So I try very hard to let that go if it doesn't happen. And we've got some fantastic talent in our troupe, and I look forward to going to practices every time I know these guys are going to be there, and I'm thinking of John and Alex and Jay and Chris in particular, who they're just such fantastic kind of left field ways of doing things. And Jay he's Canadian. He lives over here. He's he's got a fantastic kind of kind of slightly off kilter cultural references that come in really interesting, come in very handy. He does great accents and characters, and then there's John does his real deadpan stuff, and when he and I get on together, it usually goes somewhere dark very quickly. So and Chris, he's actually. He's been with us for about a year, but he's a chorist. He's a really good singer, and but he's a real comedy buff as well. So he brings a lot of really big kind of almost Falstaffian type presence to the stage. Real kind of imagine a kind of. He's like, hate me when he hears this, but I imagine the personality of someone like a kind of Brian Blessed meets Lord Flashheart in a kind of very subdued but nonetheless larger than life kind of presence. He's good fun to have on stage as well. And Alex, I mentioned, is very experienced. We do so well, and Wei Zhu as well. Wei Zhu's from Malaysia. He brings a different perspective to things, and it's just good fun. But I kind of just I'm lucky in that these guys delight me on a regular basis, and but they're also very strong-willed. So if they've got an idea. And I want my idea. Invariably, there's only one of us wins, and we go with it. And they surprise me all the time.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of fun. It sounds like really the worst improv you could imagine. Really, what I'm just describing, but we're experienced enough to go on. And if someone gets their idea in first, we drop what we're doing. It's very rare now that someone tries to shoehorn in. What they want to do. So it's a lot of I'd say that's really what delights me, is that readiness to adapt. That readiness to just roll with it, and see whatever happens. And I've sprung things on these guys and so many times, and they've just been consummately professional with it and just go with it. It's good fun.
Cool. And I suppose the flip side to that question is, what's your signature move? What did everyone go, classic Dave, saved the day again with his signature move?
Well, the one thing, I suppose, because I'm sort of sometimes player-director, I've got a mind on moving the story to a conclusion.
Nice.
So what I'll often do is forgo the obvious funny in order to remind the people of the character or the plot. So I kind of feel like the Cub Scout leader who's like turned round and all the cubs have run off into the into the woods and doing their own thing, and I'm like, guys, I kind of have that sort of thing, which can make me I feel like I'm being a bit boring, but invariably they'll say, I'm glad you did that, because we kind of went off on one a bit there. So that would be, I suppose, my move in that regard.
Yeah, and I think you need somebody or some people in the group to have a kind of a grounding effect, because otherwise people are just flying off in all directions, and I'm like, what's going on? Whereas at least if you've got somebody kind of, with a grip on what's going on, it just makes it a little bit more easy to comprehend.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that goes back to the, when I was saying that before, the kind of US versus UK experiences. The Goda is obviously in control in many respects. They're an external Goda / director, and if everyone on stage is sort of has group responsibility, it's usually the form that is in control rather than any one individual. So we had very strong forms when we were doing stuff at Pan, because you'd follow it and all of you knew you had to reach that point. And I think that's part of the issue we have with the lack of practice and the lack of a really kind of strong form sometimes, is that without that you need somebody that knows to step out of character and think about where it's all going. So it can be I heard a story once about Danny DeVito when he was an actor in and director of the War of the Roses film. You may remember.
I have seen that.
And remember Michael Douglas saying there was a scene in around a dinner table where the famous scene, if you've seen the film, where the plate is spinning just under the camera as it's flying towards Michael Douglas's head, and all the way through this scene, Danny DeVito's sitting with a camera in between his legs under the table, so he's basically just looking down under the table all the way through the scene so he can see if the shot's framed properly. And it sometimes feels a bit like that. You're in the action, but you're also kind of outside looking in. It's a weird mode to be in sometimes. But, I hope it's not too obvious I'm doing that.
No, but I think it's having the ability to be in the action, but also to step back and observe the action, I think is a really powerful thing. So I would like to be able to do that more.
Okay, I'm not sure I've got tips for you on that.
Okay, so big final question. You've sort of alluded to it a little bit, but what's next? What are you working on now? What do you want from the future?
Well, I think from a personal point of view, I'd love to see more places around the country have their own improv scene. One thing I noticed coming back, improv is huge here, but as with so many things about the UK, it's very London centric. Obviously, we've got Bristol, but you can't tell me that between Bristol and London there isn't an opportunity for something else to happen.
Yeah.
And so I would love to do more to in some way help the improv get out there into the community a bit more through any which way or form. I mean, that's a big ask for just me. There are many more well positioned people out there that could do that. But I think from a Free Radicals point of view, we'd definitely like to do play guest appearances in a few other places just to build up our network. Do more outside of Reading. We've got a few. The BSA is British Science Association. They have chapters all around the UK, so it'd be great to sort of do a few more things there. We also got introduced to two other organisations inside of this area. One is maybe quite well known to some of your listeners. The Sunday Assembly, and this is something that was co-founded by Pippa Evans. And we got one of our guest speakers a few months ago, Sophie Paul, is actually one of the organisers of the Reading Sunday Assembly, and she's asked us to do an improv themed Sunday Assembly in January, which we'll be doing at the Irish Centre. I think it's the third Sunday of January. And that's an opportunity to introduce improv to an agnostic audience, and also there's a fairly strong. They call themselves the Reading Geeks. There's a Reading Geek community, which is essentially folks involved in STEM careers or hobbies who meet periodically at the Walkabout in Reading, talk about all things to do with STEM and beer. And I got asked along to kind of just put the word out about the Radicals, because they are our potential audience. They are our potential improvisers in waiting. They are also the people whom we would love to draw potential speakers from.
Brilliant.
And had some great conversations there. There's one guy who runs a DevCon, developer conference, for one of the areas he's in. He said he'd love to have us along to do some improv workshop at his conference. That kind of thing is just bread and butter for us. So as long the more we get to play, I mean, we're fun when we're playing. You know what it's like being an improviser. The more you get, especially when you're asked to do it, you're not just springing it on somebody. It's fabulous being asked to do this, but and people actually pay attention. So that's really my goal, is to do as much as I can to help get this movement moving, because I do feel it's a great gateway into so many new things for people.
Fantastic! Thank you, thank you for being a guest on the Improv London podcast.
Thank you, Stuart. Yay!
I made this.
That's improv.